You think awakening will make you calm, pure, untouched by the chaos of human desire. But what actually happens is far more unsettling. The moment your consciousness expands, the volume of your entire humanity rises with it. You don't become less sensitive, you become unbearably sensitive. You don't escape the human condition, you feel it more intensely than ever. And this is why the spiritually awake find themselves wrestling with lust in ways they never imagined. Lust is not stronger because you are weaker. Lust is stronger because you are more awake. Awakening is not a dimming of sensation, it is a floodlight illuminating everything. The divine, the shadow, the secret impulse to love, and the primal fire that surges through the body. Before awakening, you lived half numb and called it normal. Your senses were muted, your wounds were buried, your loneliness was hidden under busyness. But when awareness cracks you open, the entire spectrum bursts into view, and the body which has been waiting for decades to be heard begins speaking loudly. The awakened person feels everything with unbearable clarity, the touch of sunlight, the weight of silence, the ache of longing, the pull of beauty, the burn of desire. Nothing is filtered anymore, and lust, which once whispered, now roars. Not because you are backsliding, but because aliveness has returned to the parts of you that were once asleep. And here lies the paradox. Awakening opens your eyes to the divine, but it also opens your senses to the raw humanness you once avoided. The beauty of another person is no longer something you glance at casually. It hits you like a wave. The energy between the bodies becomes unmistakable. The tension between loneliness and longing sharpens into something almost unbearable. And if you walk this path sincerely, you will discover another brutal truth. Awakening isolates you, not because you reject people, but because you no longer resonate with the superficial world they inhabit. Conversations feel thin, performances feel fake, social rituals feel hollow. The more conscious you become, the more you drift from the crowd, not out of arrogance, but out of incompatibility. And that isolation creates a deep hunger, a hunger not for sex itself, but for connection, recognition, warmth, presence. Lust disguises itself as the answer to that hunger. It offers contact when the heart feels untouched. It offers intensity when life feels empty. It offers closeness when your soul feels unseen. But the awakened quickly discover the lie. Lust promises connection, but delivers only a brief interruption of loneliness, followed by an even deeper emptiness. And as if this human complexity weren't enough, there's another layer, one most people never dare to admit. Awakening makes you a threat to the unconscious momentum that governs society, a threat to the psychological forces that keep people asleep, a threat to the internal shadows that resist exposure. Call it ego, conditioning, darkness, or simply the gravitational pull of unconsciousness. It pushes back hard. And lust is its most effective weapon because nothing pulls awareness down faster than craving. When desire takes over, presence collapses, consciousness narrows, the mind becomes foggy, meditation becomes impossible, the divine becomes distant. You are dragged back into the body, into urgency, into the fever of wanting. This is why the awakened struggle, not because they are failing, but because they are being challenged at precisely the level where they are most vulnerable. And beneath all this lies the deepest cause: wounds, old wounds, childhood wounds, abandonment wounds, shame wounds. Wounds awakening forces you to see with terrifying clarity. And when these wounds surface, lust rushes in like a false healer, offering comfort without healing, sensation without intimacy, escape without resolution. Awakening amplifies everything: your light, your shadow, your clarity, your longing, your hunger, your ache. This is why spiritually awake people struggle with lust, not because they are less spiritual, but because they are more human, more alive, more aware of every pulse of existence. This battle is not a sign of falling, it is a sign that you have stepped into the full intensity of being conscious in a human body. The deeper your awakening, the more violently the old structures inside you begin to crack. And one of the first things to break is the illusion that desire is simple. It isn't. Lust is never just lust. It is loneliness wearing a mask. It is longing disguised as impulse. It is the body begging for connection because the soul feels unseen. And the spiritually awake feel this 10 times more intensely than anyone else. Because awakening strips you of the numbing mechanisms everyone else still uses. You can no longer distract yourself with meaningless conversations. You can no longer bury your feelings under noise. You can no longer pretend your wounds are healed just because you've learned the language of spirituality. Awareness removes all the barriers between you and your own truth. And what does that truth reveal? An internal landscape you have ignored for years, all the unmet needs, all the unresolved pain, all the loneliness you never admitted. Awakening brings it to the surface in one overwhelming wave, and lust becomes the quickest escape hatch, not because the awakened person wants cheap pleasure, but because the awakened person feels everything too deeply. Most people are asleep enough to tolerate emotional starvation. The awakened are not. They feel the hunger instantly, sharply, painfully. And when there is no one to talk to, no one who understands, no one who speaks the language of your new consciousness, the pull toward physical intimacy becomes a desperate attempt to quiet the ache of isolation. You think lust is about sex, but it is mostly about not wanting to be alone inside a mind that sees too much. And this is where the awakened face another brutal truth. The higher you rise in consciousness, the fewer people you can genuinely connect with. You're not better than them. You're simply tuned to a different frequency. You see through illusions they still defend. You question assumptions they still worship. You examine the very foundations of identity while they are still protecting theirs. And because of this, the awakened person begins to feel like a foreigner in their own life. Normal conversations become impossible. Small talk becomes painful. Social gatherings feel like theater. And while others seem comfortable living behind their masks, you can't put yours back on. Your loneliness becomes existential. It is not the loneliness of I have no one, but the loneliness of no one can meet me where I am. In that space, lust becomes a temptation to collapse depth into sensation, consciousness into chemistry, awakening into instinct. It offers a momentary illusion of union, a moment where the hunger quiets, a moment where the heart believes, even falsely, that it is not alone. But here is the cruel cycle. The more awakened you are, the more painfully you feel the emptiness that follows, because you know exactly what lust cannot give you: presence, recognition, communion, rest. And while you're wrestling with this internal storm, there is a third force pressing against you, the inertia of unconsciousness. You become a threat the moment you wake up, not because you are dangerous, but because your awareness exposes the illusions everyone depends on. Your clarity destabilizes people who still need confusion. Your authenticity threatens people who still live behind masks. Your presence interrupts patterns that survive only through unconscious repetition. And there are forces, psychological, social, even existential, that attempt to pull you back down. Lust is one of the strongest of these forces because it bypasses intellect, bypasses insight, bypasses discipline, and goes straight for the most vulnerable place: your unhealed wounds. Every spiritual tradition warns about this, not because the body is sinful, but because unconscious desire hijacks consciousness. It pulls your attention outward. It scatters your inner stillness. It disrupts your clarity. It anchors you to the densest part of your humanity. And the more awake you are, the more noticeably you can feel your awareness contract the moment lust takes hold. This contraction feels like falling asleep inside your own body. That is why the awakened battle with lust more intensely than others. They can feel the exact moment. When desire hijacks consciousness, they can feel the inner light dim. They can feel their awareness collapse into wanting. They can feel themselves being pulled from presence into hunger. And the more conscious you are, the more painful that collapse becomes. This is not failure. It is sensitivity. It is awareness. It is the price of seeing clearly. It is the friction between your highest self and your oldest wounds. And it is the beginning of real transformation, not by suppressing desire, not by feeding it, but by understanding what stands beneath it. The next layer of this struggle is the one almost no one wants to face, because it forces you to confront a truth that is neither flattering nor comfortable. Lust is not just a force that rises within you, it is a force that targets you. The more awake you become, the more desire seems to hunt you, provoke you, whisper to you at the precise moment when your guard is lowered. And if you've noticed this pattern in your own life, you're not imagining it. When your consciousness expands, you stop moving through life on autopilot. You stop being predictable. You stop being controlled by the same unconscious loops that keep most people asleep. And the psychological ecosystem, the collective unconscious, the inherited conditioning, the shadow patterns of humanity itself reacts to this disruption. Anything that wakes up becomes a threat to whatever remains asleep. This is not mysticism. It is mechanics. Systems resist change. Patterns protect themselves, and the force that most reliably pulls even the awakened back into unconsciousness is lust. Because lust bypasses logic, bypasses intention, bypasses discipline, and goes straight into the deepest, oldest circuitry of your biology. You can meditate for hours, sit in silence for days, dissolve into states of profound clarity, and then one flash of desire can collapse your consciousness in seconds. Not because you're weak, but because you're human, and the awakened human feels the collapse more painfully than anyone else. You feel the instant shift from spacious awareness into tight craving. You feel the contraction of your mind around a single image, a single longing, a single fantasy. You feel your breath shorten, your awareness narrow, your clarity fog. You feel the gravitational pull of instinct dragging you back toward the ground after you've retasted the sky. And that fall hurts more when you've known higher states of consciousness, because you're aware of exactly what you are losing in that moment. But here's the real trap. It's not the desire itself that injures you, it's the shame that follows. The awakened are often harder on themselves than anyone else. You think, if I were truly conscious, I wouldn't feel this. You think, if I were spiritually mature, I wouldn't fall into this pattern again. You think, I should be beyond this. And every one of those thoughts is a lie that keeps you chained to the very thing you were trying to transcend. Shame does not weaken desire. Shame feeds it. Shame turns lust into a secret cycle. Shame forces you deeper into isolation. Shame makes you hide from others and from yourself. Shame turns natural human longing into something poisonous. But the awakened do not struggle because they are sinful. They struggle because they are exposed. Awareness removes the anesthetic that everyone else still uses to numb themselves. You feel everything they refuse to feel. You see everything they avoid, and that includes your wounds, the wounds that awaken with you. This is why lust resurfaces most violently when you are spiritually expanding. You assume it's a step backward, but it's actually a step downward, not into regression, but into excavation. Awakening pulls the truth to the surface, and some of that truth is painful. Forgotten rejections, abandonment you never processed, the ache of wanting to be loved, the fear that you are not enough. Lust becomes the mask that sits on top of these wounds, offering a quick chemical illusion of healing. But the awakened eventually discover that lust is not the wound, it is the symptom. And if you follow the thread of desire deeper, you always find the same roots: loneliness, longing, unworthiness, shame, hunger for connection, hunger for recognition, hunger to be held by something real. The battle with lust is not a battle with sex, it is a battle with pain, and it is the pain that must be healed, not the desire that must be killed. The awakened do not struggle with lust because they are less spiritual. They struggle because they are more honest. They feel every ripple of their humanity in high definition. They cannot lie to themselves anymore, and the moment you stop lying, transformation finally begins. Here is the part most people avoid because it forces you to confront a truth so raw, it almost feels dangerous. Lust is not your enemy, your avoidance is. The spiritually awake often assume that freedom means rising above desire, escaping it, purifying themselves into some kind of untouchable being who floats above human hunger. But this idea is not awakening, it is spiritual vanity wearing holy robes. The real path is far less glamorous. The more conscious you become, the less you can hide from yourself. And this means lust stops being a mere impulse and becomes a mirror so clear it is almost unbearable to look into. When desire rises, you are not simply feeling lust. You are feeling every fracture inside you illuminated at once. Every memory of being unloved, every moment you felt invisible, every unmet need your childhood never answered, every place where affection was missing, every corner of your heart that still believes it is unworthy of real connection. Lust exposes all of this instantly, and the awakened feel it without filters. This is why desire feels stronger after awakening, not because lust has grown, but because your defenses have fallen. The illusions that once protected you have dissolved. The distractions that once numbed you no longer work. The spiritual language you once used to bypass your emotions loses all its power. You are left with nothing but the truth, and the truth is that the human heart is wounded long before it becomes awakened. Most people never notice this because they drown their wounds in noise, entertainment, relationships, addictions, distractions, anything that keeps the inner emptiness at bay. But the awakened cannot do this anymore. Awareness makes distraction feel disgusting. Noise becomes unbearable. Fake connection becomes painful. So when lust arises, you cannot hide from it. You feel the entire weight of your humanness pressing against the walls of your consciousness. And here is the paradox everyone avoids. The more spiritually awake you become, the more your physical body refuses to be ignored. You feel your breath differently, your pulse differently, your senses differently, your cravings differently. Awakening heightens every channel of perception, including the ones you would rather transcend. This is why ancient mystics spoke of desire not as something to destroy, but as something to understand. And this is where the real struggle begins, not with lust itself, but with what lust reveals. When desire rises, it does not simply ask, "Do you want this person?" It asks a far more threatening question. What part of you is hurting? The awakened know this. They can feel exactly where the ache lives inside their chest. They can feel the loneliness that sits beneath their ribs. They can feel the emptiness that opens when their mind becomes quiet. They can feel the unhealed, places vibrating beneath the intensity of lust, calling out not for sex, but for connection, safety, recognition, warmth, belonging. Lust becomes the voice of everything in you that was never held. And that is why desire feels so violent for the awakened, because the awakened no longer have the luxury of lying to themselves. This is also why lust seems to intensify after periods of spiritual growth. You assume you're failing, but in reality, your consciousness is expanding downward into your forgotten wounds. You are not falling behind. You are descending into the material you must transform. And while this descent is happening, another danger emerges: isolation. You think being awake means being strong, self-sufficient, independent from the world. But in truth, isolation is the perfect soil for lust to grow wild. When you have no one to speak honestly with, desire becomes the only outlet for emotional pressure. When you have no one who can meet you at your depth, your longing collapses into instinct. When you carry insights you cannot share, your mind becomes a sealed chamber where desire echoes loudly. Lust thrives in your silence. It feeds on your secrecy. It grows in the spaces where you have no witness. And this is the cruelest part of all. The awakened often struggle most intensely because they struggle alone. They do not want to burden others. They do not want to appear weak. They do not want to reveal their shadows. They do not want their humanity to cancel out their spirituality. So they hide. They keep quiet. They fight in silence. And the silence becomes the very thing that devours them. The truth is simple. Lust weakens in the light. It strengthens in the dark. And awakening forces you into direct contact with the dark, not to shame you, but to free you. Here is the most difficult truth to swallow. Lust is not the obstacle blocking your awakening. Lust is the doorway revealing where your awakening is still incomplete. Every wave of desire that surges through you is a message, not a mistake. It is the body saying, "Look here, something in you is still unresolved." But because you were conditioned to treat desire as sin, weakness, impurity, you attack the signal instead of decoding it. You fight the messenger instead of receiving the message. And this is why the spiritually awake suffer more, not less. You are now too conscious to indulge blindly, but also too honest to suppress successfully. You sit between two worlds, unable to descend fully into unconscious pleasure, yet unable to ascend fully into transcendent purity. This tension is not failure. This tension is the path. The awakened struggle because they feel every dimension of desire simultaneously. When lust rises, the average person feels only the physical urge. The awakened feel the psychological hunger, the emotional emptiness, the childhood abandonment, the existential loneliness, the spiritual longing for unity, the raw animal instinct, the shame of wanting, the shame of not wanting, and the guilt for feeling anything at all at the same time, all with painful clarity. It is not lust that overwhelms you. It is the weight of everything inside you being activated at once. And the mistake you make, the mistake almost every awakened person makes, is trying to solve a multi-layered experience with a single layer reaction. You try to suppress it, or you try to detach from it, or you try to overpower it, or you try to outrun it. None of these work. Not because lust is strong, but because you are treating it as an enemy when it is actually a compass. Lust does not arise to destroy your consciousness. Lust arises to show you where your consciousness has not yet touched. Think about it. Desire only intensifies in the places where you are unconscious. The more you avoid loneliness, the stronger lust becomes. The more you avoid old wounds, the stronger lust becomes. The more you avoid emotional honesty, the stronger lust becomes. Lust is your shadow's alarm system. It goes off whenever something inside you needs attention. And this is why those who awaken spiritually face a sharper battle. Because awakening floods the unconscious with light, and everything that was hidden becomes visible. All at once, without warning, without mercy. You are not being punished, you are being shown. And the question is not how to eliminate lust, but how to become the kind of person who can sit with desire without being consumed by it. Which brings us to the turning point, the realization moment. Lust loses its power the moment you stop relating to it as a personal failing and start relating to it as a teacher. When desire rises and you say, "What are you trying to show me?" the entire dynamic changes. Instead of collapsing into craving, you expand into awareness. Instead of being dragged downward, you descend intentionally to retrieve the parts of yourself trapped underground. Instead of shame, you experience clarity. Instead of compulsion, you experience presence. The spiritual path was never about becoming less human. It was about becoming fully human without being ruled by any part of your humanity. And this includes desire. The awakened struggle with lust because their consciousness is expanding, because their wounds are surfacing, because their loneliness is real, because their sensitivity is heightened, because their old patterns are dying, because their new self is not yet stable, because the forces of unconsciousness pull harder when you begin to escape. Then, this is not a flaw in the path. This is the path. So what now? You learn to stand in the fire without burning. You learn to witness your desire without collapsing into it. You learn to stay present with the ache until the ache tells you what it means. You learn to give your body healthy outlets, your heart safe connections, your wounds honest attention, your inner world compassion instead of judgment. And slowly, the battle changes shape. Lust becomes less of a temptation and more of a conversation, less of a trap and more of a guide, less of an enemy and more of a mirror. And eventually, desire no longer hijacks you. It informs you. It does not dominate your life. It deepens it. This is the paradox that mystics understood. The goal is not to kill desire, but to become someone desire cannot control, to feel everything and be enslaved by nothing. 2. Recognize the divine in the body and the body in the divine. To be awake in the full spectrum of your humanity, not just the parts that feel holy. If you can accept this, if you can ride these waves without drowning, if you can face your shadows without running, you will discover something extraordinary. The struggle was not a barrier to awakening, it was the catalyst for it. The fire that tried to consume you was the fire that forced you. And when you stand on the other side of this battle, whole, integrated, honest, unashamed, you will realize that lust was never trying to destroy your spirituality. It was trying to complete it.